Why was she the only one moving toward the hangar while everyone else stared at the map? Riley didn't care. She'd heard enough. The orders had been simple. Barked across the operations table by Colonel Jacobs with the urgency of a man who knew the clock was already running out. "Any jet will do," he'd said. But the moment those words left his mouth, she was already halfway out the door. Outside, the air smelled like hot metal and sand. Her warthog waited on the tarmac, ugly, scarred, and perfect. Some pilots called the A10 a relic. Others called it a joke. Riley called it home. Her boots pounded against concrete. The crew chief jogged alongside her, trying to keep pace. "You sure about this, Captain?" Riley didn't answer. She just climbed the ladder, slid into the seat, and pulled the canopy down. The cockpit sealed with a hiss, shutting out the noise, the doubt, the hesitation. Switches flipped under her hands in a rhythm drilled into her bones. Fuel flow, hydraulics, weapons armament. Twin engines growled a wake low, rumbling, like something that remembered the taste of battle and wanted more. She wasn't thinking about the colonel. She wasn't thinking about the other jets that weren't. Ready. The F-15's too far out. The Raptor's grounded by tech faults. She was thinking about Echo 3, pinned down, no armor, no air cover. Minutes from being overrun. The control tower cleared her. She rolled forward, the world narrowing to the strip of concrete ahead. Full throttle, the warthog leapt, heavy but eager, into the haze. Back in the ops tent, Jacob sipped coffee, watching her blue icon streak. Toward the hot zone, one of the controllers leaned closer to him. "Sir, did you say any jet?" Jacobs didn't look away from the screen. "Yeah, why?" "It's an A-10. Jacobs froze for half a heartbeat, then muttered, "God help her." Riley didn't need help. She needed targets. The valley opened beneath her. A palette of chaos black plumes from burning brush. Tracer rounds cutting the air. A handful of U.S. soldiers crouched behind rocks as red blips swarmed in every direction. She steadied her breathing, letting the noise fall away. Echo 3. This is Hawk. Visual on friendlies. Got company. Static. Then a strained voice. Copy. "Hawk, we're getting chewed out here. You alone?" "You'll be fine." Armament master switch on. The HUD bloomed with enemy positions. She rolled into her dive, the sky bending around her. The cannon spun up with a sound no one ever forgot. Not the metallic stutter of a machine. Something. Deeper, angrier, it spoke. Thunder ripped the canyon apart. 30mm shells chewed through the enemy line, punching trucks into fireballs, sending fighters sprawling for cover. She pulled up just enough to loop, then came down again. A Con-Ad. Predator that didn't climb but swooped. Inside the command tent, no one moved. The drone feed showed her carving across the valley. Smoke trailing from the battlefield in her wake. The pinned troops peeked up from their cover. One young private dropped his rifle mid-shot. "That's a hog." His squad leader grinned through the dirt on his face. "That's Hawk," she skimmed. The ridge, barely 30 feet off the ground, letting the gun speak again. Enemy positions crumbled under her passes. RPG operators flung backwards like broken dolls, taking fire from the west ridge. "Mark with smoke," she replied. Seconds later, orange vapor blossomed against the hillside. Through her scope, she found them dark shapes moving between boulders, weapons raised. She aligned, let the crosshair rest. The cannon tore the ridge apart. Her fuel was dipping lower than she liked. She'd been flying hard low altitude, tight turns, full throttle gun runs, but she wasn't leaving yet. A technical truck crept behind the friendlies, heavy gun mounted, ready to finish the survivors. She banked hard, rolled until the horizon, flipped, and dove until she could see the whites of the driver's eyes. One pull of the trigger, and the truck was gone. "Copy, Hawk. You saved our asses." Just another Tuesday. Her voice was calm, but sweat beaded on her brow. 2F-15S. Finally arrived overhead. "Hawk, this is Talon Flight. We're on station. Welcome to the party. Scene's clear but still hot. Maintain altitude. I'm Winchester and low on fuel. We'll babysit. You've done the heavy lifting. She turned toward base. Looking down one last time, the soldiers were waving, rifles in the air, like kids seeing off a hero. The warthog passed over them, blackened, scarred, breathing heat through its gun barrel, and vanished into the horizon. 20 minutes later, her wheels touched down. The A-10 looked worse up close, shrapnel pits in one flap, nose smudged black from spent rounds. Still, it stood like a stubborn old brawler who refused to sit down. She climbed out, crew chief waiting. No words, just a nod, and then she walked toward the tent. Inside, the room fell silent. Jacob stood with arms folded. She stopped 3 feet from him. You were first on scene, he said finally. Alone. That's usually how it works. I said any jet. I didn't expect you. Then you? Shouldn't have said any jet. Smoke still curled from her warthog as mechanics swarmed it, measuring the heat on the gun, checking for damage. The cannon still glowed faint orange from the punishment it had dealt. Riley didn't linger. She stripped her helmet, stood on her flight suit, and headed back inside. The red dots on the map that had surrounded Echo 3 were gone. Everyone. We lost 0, Jacob said quietly. Not one scratch? They did their part. I did mine. No pride, no gloating, just precision. Jacob studied her face, then shook his head. Raptors don't loiter. F-15s don't turn inside a canyon. And they don't carry 1,100 rounds of gods. Judgment. That night, Echo 3 survivors landed at a forward base. Private Carson still had dirt on his face when he asked his squad leader if she'd really flown alone. Not just flew it, came the answer. She owned it. You ever hear a hog's cannon up close? Carson shook his head. Feels like the earth ripping in half, and she made it sing. Back in the debriefing room, Riley sat still in her suit while an officer read the stats aloud. 27 confirmed kills. 3 vehicle strikes, 0 friendly fire. She corrected him on a single miss. You're ridiculous, the officer muttered. You should see me on a bad day. Jacobs watched the drone footage alone. Her dive on the RPG team. Her turns inside the canyon. Every move deliberate, every strike perfect. He closed the high altitude doctrine binder and reached for the radio. Keep the A-1Os fueled and ready. Even if they're slow, we're not fighting speed. We're fighting persistence. Outside, under a darkening sky, Riley stood beside her warthog, a maintenance tech. Approached with a rag. You want us to scrub her down? She shook her head. Leave it. Let her breathe. Somewhere on base, soldiers replayed helmet cam footage of her passes. The cannon scream, the truck exploding, the cheers afterward. They weren't watching just a jet. They were watching salvation. Later, back in her quarters, she found a folded note in her locker. We owe you everything. She stared at it a long moment before tucking it into her flight log and turning out the light. The new assignment came in the morning, but Riley had already been awake. She always was. Colonel Jacobs didn't need to say much. Another unit surrounded, different terrain. Unfamiliar threat, she nodded, already mapping it in her head. On the flight line, the crew was loading ordnance beneath her warthog's wings. She inspected the loadout like a chef inspecting a knife before the cut. Every missile, every bomb, every belt of cannon rounds had to be just right. A young crewman glanced at her, hesitation in his voice. Captain, don't you ever get scared flying that low? She tugged her gloves tight. The day I stop getting scared is the day I get sloppy. Engines roared. The beast woke again. In the air, she rode thermals until she hit 10,000 feet. Then cut the power. Silence wrapped around her like a shroud. Most pilots avoided gliding the A-10. It was risky. Left you without thrust if you needed to climb in a hurry. But Riley had learned something about silence. It scared people more than noise. Her thermal scope picked up movement along the ridge figures moving toward a launcher. The margin for error was seconds. She eased the throttle, ghosting in until the shapes filled her crosshair. Fire. The cannon didn't just fire. It roared, tearing the launcher and half the ridge into dust. Figures scattered, some diving into caves. She banked hard, circling. Caves, she muttered. Smart, but not smart enough. 2 thermobaric rounds dropped in quick succession, collapsing the entrance without spilling debris down into civilian areas. The explosion wasn't loud. It was deep, a low thud that made the ground seem to groan. At FOB Ashburn, Jacobs watched the live feed with 2 NATO observers. That cave's been used for arms trafficking for 2 years, one of them said. How'd she find it? Satellite couldn't. Jacobs allowed himself the smallest smile. She heard it. She was 20 minutes from base when a distress beacon flashed across her secondary monitor. 10 clicks northeast, friendly recon patrol under threat, suspected. Hostile UAV overhead. She checked her fuel. Enough for a detour and 1 solid strike. Control. This is Hawk, diverting. The patrol was hiding in a shallow gulch-perfect ambush territory. She dropped low, weaving between canyon walls, until her threat warning lit red. Missile lock, she popped flares, slammed the throttle forward, and dove into a canyon so narrow her wingtips missed rock by less than 10 feet. A branch scraped the belly of her warthog. Another lock tone. Another missile. She rolled hard left, flares blooming bright in the dusk. The missile veered away, missing her tail by inches. Her voice was steady. Now it's my turn. She climbed, rolled inverted, and dove upside down through the gap. In her scope, a fighter was raising a launcher. 5 rounds tore him from the rock. Whoever that was, thank you, came the breathless voice on the radio. Next time, don't hide near cliffs. Back at base, Jacobs didn't waste words. You saved 2 missions in 4 hours. You dodged 2 shoulder-fired missiles and killed a drone with no support. You scare me, Jameson. She smirked. Good. He shook his head. You know what scares me more? We only have 1 of you. The next day was still. No emergency pings, no scramble orders. Riley sat at the edge of the flight line, coffee in hand, staring at the hazy east. Silence didn't relax her. It waited. 2 young pilots passed behind her, whispering. I think she dreams in infrared. One said, You don't fly like that without losing something. The other replied, she ignored them. She hadn't lost something. She gave it away every time she dove alone into fire. Inside the war room, Jacob studied new satellite images. Insurgents were moving weapons through ancient cliffside caravan. Roots ravines too deep for drones. Cloud cover too heavy for satellites. There were no clean insertion points for infantry. Send in Hawk, he said. Minutes later, she was walking across the tarmac. Mechanics stood aside like it was a ritual. Her warthog was scarred, loaded with thermobarics, GPS-guided bombs, and a fresh belt of 30mm shells curling into the gun's throat. Her crew chief frowned. Same loadout as Echo 3. Mostly. She said, Be careful. Weather's thick over Delta 2. No satellite eyes. You'll be blind. Half the time. Wouldn't be the first time. 10 minutes after takeoff. She was pushing through clouds so thick the HUD flickered. She flew low, too. Low for radar-guided missiles, but high enough to avoid canyon microbursts. When the clouds broke, she saw them 8 trucks under camo netting, weaving between cliffs. They weren't running. They were rehearsing. Perfect vehicle spacing, coordinated acceleration. She liked manual targeting. No GPS needed. The first strike was clean dead center. Fire rolled through the canyon. Gunfire answered from the rocks. She swung wide, dropped a bomb into the canyon wall. Burying another truck in stone, on the 3rd pass, she saw 2 fighters kneeling beside a structure built into the cliff. They didn't run. They wanted her to fire. Lock warning screamed. A missile burst from the cave mouth. She rolled left, flares trailing bright. The missile clipped her tail, not enough to kill her. but enough to make the controls sluggish. In the command tent, red lights flashed. Possible impact on Hawk. Jacobs leaned forward. She's going back in, isn't she? No one answered. She circled, steadying her pitch with micro-movements. The launcher inside that cave was the real threat. She had one laser-guided bomb left. Manual lock, no margin for error. She flew straight at the cave, ignoring the groaning frame of her jet. Dropped the bomb. The mountain erupted. She turned for home, warthog limping, smoke trailing, but victorious. Jacobs was waiting on the tarmac. That was a decoy. Convoy. They were testing how far we'd chase them. Didn't like their hospitality, she said. Medics wanted tests. She let them. Oxygen, reflex, thermal scans looking for damage they wouldn't find. Not trauma, not hesitation, just fatigue. And something she never named. Later that night, she sat outside her bunk, cleaning her gloves with a toothbrush. The ritual calmed her. Remove the dust, remove the blood, remove the weight. Lieutenant Grayson appeared awkwardly, tray of food in hand. You didn't have to go back in, he said. If I didn't, someone else would have died. He hesitated. What does it feel like, the moment you pull the trigger? She looked at her gloves. Final, she said. It feels final. In the war room, Jacob saw the bigger patterned strategic feints, baited ambushes, precision traps. The enemy wasn't just attacking, they were hunting. Command wanted her to brief the officers. She hated the dress blues. No soot, no call sign patch, just fabric and brass that hadn't seen combat. Still, she stood at the front of the room. Remote in hand, this is your convoy decoy. She began. Vehicle spacing is textbook. Watch. Acceleration. They don't push the lead truck. That's your first tell. Slide after slide. She dismantled the enemy's playbook. One captain interrupted. You wanted to draw fire? I needed to find the cave. They wouldn't show unless. They thought I didn't see it. And if they were right, then I'd be dead. Jacob's voice came from the back. And she's not. Afterward, one officer asked if she'd train new pilots. Another invited her to join an air-to-ground doctrine panel. She nodded to both and meant neither. She had no plans to teach. She had plans to fly. The storm came 2 days later. Not weather, not artillery, something worse. A refugee convoy, 70 civilians, was ambushed at Grid Zulu 4, trapped between an improvised minefield and a broken ridge. Mortar fire fell on them from a hillside. They couldn't see. They had no escort, no armor, no satellite cover, and almost no time. The call reached base with a voice that couldn't hide the edge in it. Immediate extraction or air cover required. Nothing else close enough. Nothing except her. Riley was halfway through a conversation when the flight officer intercepted her. They're pinned at the valley's bend. Ridge has mortar teams. Maybe drones, no air defenses, but no clear sight lines. Are they moving? Front vehicle hit a mine. Casualties unknown. They're boxed in. She slid her helmet on. What's the window? 14 minutes until they're overrun. She glanced at her watch. I'm already late. This time, she loaded light, cluster munitions, high explosive rockets, full cannon belts. Speed mattered more than payload. The warthog launched hard, clawing into the sky. Zulu 4 may have children. Base control warned. Watch fire radius. Copy. I'll be surgical. The valley came fast, too fast for comfort. Steep hills, jagged ridges, scattered trees that hid more than they revealed. Muzzle flashes winked faintly through camo. Netting, she saw the first mortar tube recoil. Pulled left, dropped clusters into the thicket. Direct hit. 4 more flashes from the opposite side. She inverted, looped low, and ripped the trees apart with cannon fire. Mortar fell silent. Below, the convoy began to move. Then a second explosion rocked the column IED under the 4th. Truck. Smoke rolled. Screams cut through the open comms from above. She saw what the convoy couldn't, fighters, at least 10, emerging from the rocks on their flank. No permission asked. She dove. The cannon roared, low and deep, shaking the valley. Dust and fire swallowed the ambush in under 2 minutes. She made 6 passes, every burst measured, every strike close enough for soldiers to swear they saw her eyes behind the canopy. Dry on ammo, she circled high, watching until the last civilian crossed the ridge. Only then did she turn home. Jacobs was waiting at the runway. His voice was low. "I need you to know if you hadn't launched when you did." 70 people, she said, tired, alive because you didn't wait for orders. She looked toward her warthog, paint scorched along the nose. Warthog's wrath. "I don't wait," she said. "I act." 2 nights later. The hangar was dark, except for the glow off her 10's cannon barrel. It had been with her over towns, through ravines, across kill zones. Tonight, it sat silent, the metal groaning like an old dog in pain. She didn't sleep much anymore. When she did, the images came: convoys burning, fighters dissolving into smoke, children's screams muffled behind sandbags. She remembered every frame in perfect detail. Still, she suited up at the officers' mess. The talk had shifted, not about her kill count or survival rate, but something heavier. How long can one pilot hold this tempo? Someone muttered, "She's more machine than human now," another said. Even Jacobs, listening from the corner, couldn't deny the truth. She was flying twice the op-tempo of anyone else. Half the time she didn't wait for backup. She was trusted. She was also alone. The next morning, a new file arrived, encrypted, eyes only. Jacobs read it, and the name buried inside hit like a punch. Argocell, not insurgents, professionals, ex-military, ex-intelligence, mercenary ghosts who took high-value contracts for regimes that didn't want fingerprints. Now they were in country near Sector Bravo 9, within range of a humanitarian aid depot. They weren't just here to fight. They were here to send a message. Jacobs found Riley on the range, hitting distant steel with her sidearm like it was nothing. "Argocell's operating near Bravo 9, he said. "How many?" "Unknown. High probability." "What's the target?" "Aid convoy, doctors, civilians. They'll hit it for media impact." "When?" "Tonight." She didn't ask for backup, didn't check the weather. "Then I'll fly alone." An hour later, she was in the cockpit. Final armaments. Dual Mavericks. Fletchet pods. Armor-piercing cannon rounds. Nothing soft. A young tech stepped up with the checklist. He hesitated. "You ever scared, ma'am?" She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Every time. The Bravo 9 sector was strange dunes merging into dead riverbeds. Forests of abandoned concrete. Haze that made even infrared blur. The convoy was already moving, headlights off. They didn't know they were being stalked. She switched to thermal, 6 heat signatures on the ridge. Perfectly spaced. Too perfect. They weren't attacking yet. They were waiting, coordinating. First strike, Fletchet spread. Trees shredded. The figures scattered. Some ran. Others fired RPGs into the dark. Desperate, she swung wide, pulled high G, came back for the real run. 2 Mavericks locked. Fire. Both. Hit with precision positions gone in fire and dust, and yet no bodies. Her gut tightened. Lock warning. Missile inbound. She flared. Rolled left. The missile grazed her fuselage. Smoke bled from the starboard engine. Slower now. She climbed for a better look. And saw it. The Argo team wasn't hunting the convoy. They were hunting her. 6 new heat signatures, camouflage shooters with laser designators and man-portable missiles. If they downed her over friendly convoy airspace, it would look like friendly fire. It would be a propaganda goldmine. She checked systems. 1 Maverick left. No time for finesse. She looped wide into the moonless dark, cut her engines, a ghost dive. Gravity pulled her steep. Below, 1 shooter turned too late. The cannon spat 30 rounds in 2 seconds. Target gone. Final Maverick locked on a signal source at their comes. Post, fire, direct hit, 5 targets down. The sixth fired just before she cleared the ridge. She didn't see it, didn't hear it, only felt the impact. The warthog jolted sideways. HUD died. She was blind. She kept flying, back at base. Comms lit. Up. Hawk has gone dark. Jacob's voice was steady. She's alive. How can you be sure? They haven't confirmed a kill. 10 minutes. No signal. Then, at 22:17 hours, one line broke through static. This is Hawk. Bird wounded. Mission complete. En route. When she landed, the base was silent. Not from fear. From reverence, her. Jet limped in, scorched and holed, one wing black with carbon. She stepped out under her own power. Someone started to clap. She walked past them. Get her rearmed, she said. We're not done. They grounded her the next morning, not because they didn't trust her, because her jet could no longer fly. Shrapnel had punctured both engine manifolds. Internal power routing was fried. The diagnostics said it was a miracle the A-10 had even made it back. One more pass, one more second in the air, and she'd have been ash and aluminum scattered across the desert. But none of that mattered to Riley. Grounding her meant someone else would fly the next sortie. Someone slower, someone not her. Jacobs found her in the maintenance bay at 0400, wrench in hand. Hydraulic oil streaking her uniform. She was elbow deep. Inside a melted panel. They're ordering in a replacement airframe. He said, 72 hours. I'm not waiting 72 hours. You're putting her back together with elbow grease and rage. She didn't look up. That's more than most pilots start with. He stepped closer. You're exhausted, Riley. You've been flying redline missions for 2 months straight. I need you sharp, not stubborn. She stopped turning the wrench. This isn't about being stubborn. Then what? She looked at him, and for the first time, there was something raw in her eyes. It's about finishing this. Intel confirmed her suspicion. Argo's final strike was coming. Their escape route was secured. A private aircraft scheduled to depart from a dirt strip near Sector Whiskey 2 in less than 48 hours. Their objective wasn't just destruction, it was silence. The target, the only rural broadcast station still operating in the region. It wasn't just signal, it was hope. The station had shown convoy rescues, humanitarian airdrops, even helmet cam footage of Riley's warthog cutting through mortar teams. Locals had given her a name, Shaheen the Hawk. If Argo succeeded, they wouldn't just bring down a tower, they'd kill a symbol by noon. Base engineers declared her jet structurally unsound for combat. By sunset, Riley had rerouted electrical flow manually, rebuilt a wing actuator from salvaged parts, and burned her hands pulling a warped panel out of the cooling system. By midnight, it passed a startup test. The cannon roared in a dry fire. Diagnostic, the hangar trembling with the sound. She called Jacobs. It's flying. He didn't argue. He asked one question. When? Now. The flight to Whiskey 2 was over 200 clicks. Nothing but barren ridges, dry craters, and ghost towns long since abandoned. She went alone. Fuel pods for range. 2 Mavericks. 1 JDAM. A custom heat seeker. Full cannon shells. Her cockpit was patched with duct tape and stripped wiring. HUD blinked in and out. It flew, so she flew. The landscape passed below like an old, faded photographed brown hills, snaking gullies, the skeleton of a city that had once been alive. The broadcast tower appeared on the horizon, a steel spire ringed with sandbags, defended by a handful of volunteers with rifles. No armor, no heavy guns. Just people who refused to leave. She keyed her mic. This is Hawk, inbound to Whiskey 2. Any activity? Static, then a voice, thin and scratchy. 3 armored pickups spotted 2 hours ago. Southridge, no engagement yet. Copy, stay under cover, I'll sweep first. She banked right, scanning the ridge. It was too quiet. Thermal showed. Nothing. Then metal glinting under canvas. 1 truck half buried beneath netting. Then another. They weren't aiming for the station. They were aiming for an exit, farther east. She spotted it 6 kilometers away. A flat strip of gravel, fuel drums, a temporary beacon. A plane was coming. They were waiting for a vac. She dropped altitude. That's when the first missile came. 2 heat seekers, one from the ridge, one from behind the station. She rolled hard. Flares bursting in bright blooms. One missile spiraled away. The other clipped her wing edge. Metal screamed. "You missed," she growled. Her cannon swept the ridge. One shooter vanished in smoke. She pulled back. Locked her JDAM onto the landing strip, their escape route. On the way, impact. The airfield erupted in a column of fire and debris. Their exit was gone. They came to her. 6 fighters emerged from the sand, shoulder launches ready. She didn't hesitate. Low sweep. Cannon tore through 5 in seconds. The 6th fired round punched her canopy, spider webbing the glass, but missed her body. She rolled back, ended it with the 2nd pass. Silence fell over Whiskey 2. The station crew emerged from cover, blinking at the sky like they'd seen a god descend in iron and fire. Someone grabbed a hand crank camera. She didn't pose. She just hovered a moment, then peeled away westward. Fuel warning blinking. She landed at base on fumes. Jacobs was waiting. This time, he didn't speak. He just offered his hand. She didn't take it. She stood on her own, for the first time in weeks, maybe months. She smiled. That night, the footage aired across the region. The burning airstrip, the Hawk swooping low. Children made the sound of her engines with their mouths. In the center of a refugee camp, someone painted a mural her, a 10 arcing over a red sun. Beneath it, they wrote Shaheen. They offered her a medal. She refused. "I don't fly for ribbons," she said. "I fly to end things." But the next morning, she walked into the training tent. 20 young pilots sat in folding chairs, most of them barely through their first mission briefs. "You want to survive out there?" she said. "Stop flying like this is a video game. Stop waiting for orders when people are dying. Stop thinking jets win wars." She stepped closer. "People do. You do. When you stop flying scared. And if you ever need backup." She paused, looked around the room. "You know where to find me." The day began gray and cold, the kind of chill that seeped into bones and memories alike. By first light, Riley was already suited up, helmet cradled in the crook of her arm, boots crunching frost on the tarmac. The hangar was almost empty, just her warthog sitting there like an old friend scarred. Battered and ready, today's mission was different. It wasn't about rescue. It wasn't about holding the line. It was about finality. Word had come down. Argo's last stronghold had been located, a compound buried deep in the jagged mountains. Hidden in shadows and whispers, a place no drone could reach, a place satellites couldn't see through the cloud and stone. Jacobs met her at the edge of the flight line. His face was hard, but his eyes carried something else, an understanding. "Today we finish this," he said. Riley nodded. "Oh, we don't come back." The climb was tense and cold. She kept the radio chatter to a minimum, tactical updates only. Each mile forward meant less margin for escape. The mountains swallowed her HUD as she descended into the canyons. Signal faded, replaced by the low hum of the engines and the occasional creak of the airframe under strain. They knew she was coming. Heat signatures bloomed on her scope. Fighters everywhere, shoulder launchers, tripwires across the narrowest passes. Anti-aircraft guns dug into rock. The warthog was outnumbered, but it was never helpless. She dropped. Low, weaving between jagged ridges, the cannon barked, spitting fire into the first cluster of enemies. Rockets followed bright streaks, carving paths through the compound's outer defenses. The ground teams fired wildly, hoping to catch her. In their sights, they didn't mid-strike. The missile warning screamed. She dove, flares blooming, spun hard to avoid the incoming. The jet shook violently, panels rattling, alarms flashing. A second missile, closer this time. She banked sharp, barely clearing a knife-edge rock face. From the canyon floor, something new rose, a stealth drone, silent laser designator glowing. Her HUD caught the signal just in time. A flick of her wrist. Maverick lock fire. The drone exploded mid-air. Sparks scattering into the canyon. She kept moving. Always moving. It was a battle measured in seconds and meters. But every decision felt deliberate. She was no longer flying the warthog. She was the warthog. Steel, precision, and relentless intent. After minutes that felt like hours, the compound's defense lines cracked. Ammunition stores erupted in secondary blasts. The fortress burned from the inside out. Her voice was calm when she keyed the radio. Target destroyed, returning to base. Jacob's reply was simple. Copy, Hawk. We're waiting. The return flight was quiet. Too quiet. Her body was taut, ready for one last missile that never came. When she landed, the tarmac was lined, not just with pilots, but medics, engineers, crew chiefs. No one spoke at first. Jacob stepped forward. Jameson, you've done what no one thought possible. She shook her head. It's not me. It's every pilot who refuses to quit. He smiled faintly. We owe you more than medals. Weeks later, she stood on a stage at the Pentagon. The distinguished flying cross in her hands felt heavy, not with pride, but with weight she didn't want to carry. I fly because people need me to fly, she told the audience. I fight because people need me to fight, and I come home because I want to make sure someone else gets to do the same. Silence followed her words. She left the medal in the case. Back home, she visited a school in her old neighborhood. Kids stared wide-eyed at her flight jacket, at the helmet she set gently on the desk. One boy raised his hand. Are you a superhero? She smiled. No, just someone who refused to stop. Jacobs never forgot the day he'd said, any jet will do, and watched her walk to the hangar without a word. She had flown into that first battle because she didn't care about the politics or the odds. She cared about getting there first, about not hesitating. Sometimes, legends aren't built on sleek machines or perfect plans. They're built on iron, on stubbornness, on a pilot who flies when everyone else waits. Riley wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The medal stayed in its case. It sat on a shelf in her quarters, untouched, collecting a thin layer of dust. Riley never once took it out, never wore it. She wasn't flying for decorations. The weeks after the Pentagon ceremony were wrong. Too much quiet. Too many days without the roar of engines in her ears. She trained. She drilled. She went through the motions, but the warthog sat cold more often than not, and it felt like a part of her was cooling with it. Jacobs knew it. He didn't push her into missions she didn't need to fly, but he also didn't stop watching for the moment the right one came along. It came sooner than either of them expected. A humanitarian convoy, 3 trucks carrying medical supplies, was heading toward a border camp. The road wound through a narrow valley, steep on both sides with no alternate route. Intelligence spotted a new threat, an enemy unit setting up a string of explosives along the rock wall. The detonation wouldn't just stop the convoy, it would bury it. By the time the report reached command, the trucks were already 3 hours into their route. No one close enough to help. No one. Except her. Jacobs didn't waste time with orders. He just walked into the hangar. They're laying charges right now. You want it? Riley was already pulling on her gloves. The warthog hadn't flown in a week. It felt heavier under her boots, almost resentful of the rest. She climbed into the seat, flicked switches, and let the engines wake in a slow, low growl. In the air, she followed the valley north, hugging the contours so tightly that shadows covered her approach. Thermal scan lit up with figures on the cliffs. Some crouched near black cylinders, some running tables into cracks in the rock. She didn't bother calling a warning. Her first pass shredded the cable team's 30mm rounds tearing through the rock face, sending shards and dust into the air. She banked hard, looped over the valley, and came in from the opposite side, hitting the charge placement crew before they could run. The survivors tried to scatter into the shadows. Riley didn't let them. By the time she pulled away, the cliff face was scarred with impact marks and the convoy was still rolling. She stayed high until the trucks cleared the valley. When she landed, the crew chief glanced at her with a smirk. "You didn't even scratch the paint." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. 2 days later, a call came through from a forward recon unit. They'd been tailing an enemy convoy suspected of carrying high-value munitions. The trail led into a canyon system so deep that GPS dropped out completely. No drones could follow. They wanted eyes in the sky. The warthog roared again. Inside the canyon, flying meant threading a needle at 300 knots. She banked around. Rock spires so close she could see her own shadow racing along the stone. The convoy came into view, 5 trucks, each with tarped cargo. She couldn't risk a full strike without knowing what was under those covers. She dropped to 60 feet, engines echoing off the canyon walls, just low enough to make the drivers panic. It worked. One tarp blew open in the wind, revealing the dull metallic shapes of missile warheads. That was all she needed. She climbed, rolled, and came down on them like the namesake of her call sign. The first truck vanished in flame. The second and third swerved into the canyon wall. She let the survivors run, engines screaming as they fled deeper into the maze. But she wasn't finished. Her gut told her they'd lead her somewhere, and they did. Half a mile ahead, the canyon opened into a basin, and in that basin sat a camouflaged tent city. It wasn't a camp. It was a staging ground. Launchers, fuel depots, more munitions than she'd seen in months of flying. She didn't hesitate. Bombs first 2 precision drops that lit the basin in fire. Then the cannon, sweeping across the fleeing shapes. The explosions echoed so long it felt like the mountains themselves were mourning. When she pulled away, nothing moved below. Back at base, Jacobs listened to her after action and the debrief. "You realize you just crippled their supply chain for the entire sector?" "Good," she said. That night, she didn't clean her gloves. She sat outside the hangar, watching the stars through the frame of her A-10's wing. The silence didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt temporary. It never lasted long. At 0430, Jacobs woke her with a knock on the door. Intel just confirmed Argo's regrouping. New sector, heavier defenses. She rubbed her eyes. "And you want me to break it? I want you to end it by the time the sun rose." She was already walking toward her warthog, the sound of her boots on the concrete, the only thing breaking the morning stillness. The sky over Sector Ironhand was the color of burnt steel. Argo had regrouped fast, too fast. Intelligence suggested they were massing for a counterstrike, something large enough to undo weeks of hard-won ground. The problem was their location. A plateau riddled with old military tunnels and surface positions, ringed by cliffs too high for armor and too steep for infantry without heavy losses. They were daring the coalition to try them. Riley didn't hesitate. The briefing lasted 6 minutes. She spoke only 3 words. "Load her heavy." The crew complied. Twin Mavericks, a single JDAM, 4 high-explosive rockets, full belts of 30mm armor-piercing rounds, enough to fight a small war alone. On takeoff, the warthog felt heavy in her hands, the kind of weight that promised there'd be no easing into the mission-only work. At 15 miles out, she went low. The approach was tight, threading valleys that funneled her toward the plateau like the barrel of a gun. Her HUD bloomed with heat signatures, too many to count. The first pass was about shock. She lit the outer defenses, destroying a trio of anti-air positions before they could lock. Explosions rippled along the perimeter. Dust and smoke rolled up the cliffs. Return fire came fast. Tracer rounds toward the air. She banked hard. Flares blooming as a missile screamed past her canopy close enough to feel its heat. Her second pass was surgical. She threaded her cannon fire through a nest of launchers tucked under a cliff overhang. The round struck home, collapsing rock onto the position, taking the crew with it. But Argo was ready for her now, from the far side of the plateau. A flash shoulder-fired missile, she flared, juked right. Another flash, closer, then a third. They were firing in sequence, forcing her into predictable evasions. She broke pattern, climbing sharply before cutting throttle into a stall, turned swinging the nose down in a maneuver that risked stalling. The engines all together. Gravity pulled her into a steep dive, and she rode it straight toward the launcher team that had been waiting for her to level out. One short burst of the cannon erased them. Still here, she muttered to herself. Then, she saw at the tunnel entrances. 3 of them, spaced evenly along the plateau wall, camouflaged under netting and debris. That's where they were storing whatever they planned to use for the counterstrike. The JDAM was for this. She banked out wide, climbed into the haze locked. The first entrance and dropped the bomb. The explosion cracked the plateau wall, fire pouring out of the tunnel mouth like the breath of some underground beast. Secondary detonations followed, ammunition cooking off inside. 2 entrances left. She came around for another run, but the plateau erupted with gunfire. The sheer volume was staggering, hundreds of rounds stitching the air around her. The warthog shuddered as impacts sparked against her armor. Warning lights flared across her panel. Not now, she growled, forcing the nose level, eyes locked. On the second entrance, she fired a rocket-perfect strike. Another chain of explosions roared from inside the tunnel. One left, her fuel was dipping, ammunition low, but she wasn't leaving it standing. She dove again, skimming so close to the plateau that rocks clipped her wingtip. Cannon roared, tearing the last tunnel's camouflage apart before she dumped the final rocket into its mouth. The fireball was so bright it left afterimages on her vision. She pulled away, climbing for altitude, breathing hard. The plateau burned below, black smoke curling into the sky. Then impact. Something hit her hard from behind, not a missile shrapnel. From one of the secondary blasts, the tail jerked sideways, and she felt the controls go sluggish. Her HUD flickered, then steadied. But the warthog's climb slowed to a crawl. She could make it out. If nothing else hit her, Control, Hawk, bird wounded, heading home. Copy, Hawk. All sectors show your strikes were successful. Repeat target neutralized. The flight back felt longer than the mission. Every vibration felt like it might be the last. When she touched down, the warthog's landing gear screamed under the strain. She rolled to a stop, canopy still down, staring straight ahead. Jacobs approached slowly, scanning the battered aircraft. "You almost didn't make it back," he said. Her voice was quiet. Almost. The mechanics swarmed the bird, already arguing over what could be salvaged. One of them muttered, "We'll be lucky if she flies." Again, Riley climbed down, removed her helmet, and set it on the wing. "She'll fly," she said. "We're not finished." The warthog wasn't ready, not according to the maintenance logs, not according to the engineers, and not according to common sense. But Riley didn't wait for permission. The repairs had been patchwork new hydraulics in one wing, a reboard, cannon barrel, electrical wiring stripped and rerouted by hand. The paint still bore scorch marks from iron hand. She liked it that way. Jacobs knew better than to try stopping her. When the intel came in, he simply walked to the hangar and told her the target. Argo's last survivors had retreated deep into the mountains, to a compound that hadn't existed on any map. Reports said it was a fortress, multiple layers of aves, defense, anti-air batteries, and the worst terrain imaginable. No drones could get in. No infantry could approach without being seen miles away. If they stayed there, they'd rebuild. "Today we finish it," Jacob said. Riley zipped her flight. "Suit, or we don't come back." The air over the mountains was thin and sharp, the kind that makes every breath feel earned. She descended into the canyons, the signal bars on her HUD dropping to nothing. They were waiting. Her thermal display lit with targets, fighters moving between fortified gun pits, rocket teams crouched. Under netting, the pale glow of missile launchers peeking from camouflaged huts. The first pass was pure aggression, 30mm shells tearing across a line of anti-air emplacements, sending dust and debris into the wind. Rockets followed, streaking into secondary positions, setting off ammunition stores in bright orange bursts. Return fire erupted. Tracers laced the air. 2 missiles launched within seconds of each other. She popped flares, banked hard, and let instinct guide her through the crossfire. One missile spiraled into a cliff face. The other missed by meters. She rolled low over the compound's perimeter, hugging the terrain so tightly that rock faces blurred past her canopy. Then a new threat, a small stealth drone, hovering almost motionless, its laser designator flickering like an unblinking eye. She locked a Maverick on it. Fire. The missile found its mark, the drone disappearing in a spray of sparks. She climbed, banking for a wide run, but they anticipated her. More launchers came online hidden in the ridges, opening fire the moment she cleared the valley wall. The warthog rattled as rounds struck her armor. One hit tore into her port side stabilizer, sending a vibration through the entire airframe. Warning lights bloomed red across her panel. She ignored them. There was one part of the compound she hadn't hit yet, the central storage depot. A reinforced structure built directly into the mountain. If they had any chance of fighting again, it would come from there. She lined up for the strike, took the shot. The explosion was deeper than sound, a pressure wave rolling through the canyon, followed by the slow, deliberate collapse of the depot's outer walls. Inside, fires caught, ammunition cooked off. The mountain spat flame and smoke. She circled once, scanning for any sign of organized return fire. There was none. The defenders had broken. Her voice over comms was steady. Target destroyed. Returning to base. The flight back was a long, quiet exhale. When she landed, the tarmac was lined with faces, pilots, medics, mechanics, even infantry from Echo 3, the same unit she'd sheed. Save that first day. No applause, no cheers, just silent respect as she taxied in, canopy still closed. The warthog idling like a tired old brawler. Jacobs waited at the nose. She climbed down slowly, boots hitting the concrete with the weight of everything she'd carried through the last months. "You've done what no one thought possible," he said. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "It's every pilot who refuses to quit." Weeks later, at a quiet ceremony stateside, she accepted another medal she didn't want. This time she spoke. "I fly because people need me to fly. I fight because people need me to fight. And I come home because I want someone else to get that same chance." War isn't about jets or weapons. It's about people, always. The room stayed silent long after she left the stage. Back home, she visited the same school in her old neighborhood. A little girl tugged her sleeve and asked, "Are you a superhero?" Riley smiled. "No, I'm just someone who refuses to stop." That night, she stood alone in the hangar, her warthog behind her, its skin still wearing the grime of its last mission. Outside, the wind swept across the tarmac, carrying the faint smell of fuel and steel. She knew there would be another call. There always was. But for now, there was only the quiet, and in that quiet, the truth settled in like a shadow. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.